Hello and welcome to the Green Collar Careers Podcast. I'm your host, Jose Almanzar, and for today's episode, I'm speaking with Cristina Garcia. Cristina is the founder of Latinxs and Sustainability, a group aimed at uniting Latinx identifying professionals and students in the sustainability and STEM industries. Cristina started the organization in 2017 to help address the lack of Latino representation in the sustainability and environmental space. In this interview, Cristina and I discuss her educational and career journey, barriers to entry that many diverse professionals face when they want to work in the environmental space, and the importance of mentors and community building. I learned so much speaking with Cristina in this interview, and I think you'll enjoy this episode as much as I do. Enjoy! Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. I am so excited to have Cristina Garcia with me today. Cristina is the founder of Latinxs and Sustainability, a New York City focused but eventually global organization that is looking to connect Latinos in the sustainability space so they can all work together, network. Cristina, where are you? How are you? What's going on? Tell me.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I am good. I'm so excited to be here. And I am located right now, right outside of New York City in Union City, New Jersey.
How long have you been there?
I moved here during the pandemic. So in 2020, I had been living in Queens prior, which is where I'm from. And then during COVID, we moved and we've been here since.
So Cristina and I spoke briefly a few weeks ago, and she did disclose that she's in New York City. You were not born in New York City, though, right?
Oh, yeah. Born and raised in Queens.
Born and raised in Queens. What neighborhood?
Floral Park. It's Eastern Queens. For those listening who maybe are not so familiar, there is a floral park in Long Island, but there's also a floral park in Queens. So do not get those two mixed up. It's definitely Queens.
Yeah, no, and we shared some fun stories about I had all of 10 years in Queens, so I'm not going to consider myself a Queens native. I grew up in Washington Heights, but it's interesting when you move to diverse neighborhoods in New York City. They all have their own different cultures and flavors, but the stories from the kids who grew up in the 80s and 90s are almost all the same, right? So Cristina, tell us a little bit about your educational background, your professional background.
Yeah, sure. So I can start with education. So I, in like middle school and high school, ended up excelling in like science and math. And that led to, once it was time to apply for colleges, an advisor told me, well, if you're good at math and science, you should either go into teaching or engineering. And looking back on it, that was not like, there were so many other choices. That was not great advice. But it did work out for me because I ended up pursuing engineering. And part of this also kind of ties to my story. I'm first generation. My parents immigrated from Colombia. Actually, where we first landed in Queens was Jackson Heights, which is a very common trajectory for Colombians that come to New York City. But I didn't have that, resource at home. And that's why this advisor's pretty crappy advice was still like all I had, because my parents had not gone to college. They really couldn't provide that type of guidance and mentoring for me. And so I had to seek that elsewhere. And that's why, I ended up listening to this person, even though there was clearly so many other options that could have been on the table. But like I said, it did work out for me. I pursued engineering. Honestly, when they told me that advice, it was like, okay, I Googled like engineering and civil came up as like one of the most common. And I was like, okay, I will pick that. And so I started off as civil engineering, as a civil engineering major. And then like a year and a half into my degree, I watched An Inconvenient Truth, the Al Gore movie. And I was like blown away. Like, oh my God, this is one of the, largest crises of our time. Like, I need to be a part of this solution. And so I immediately switched to, luckily I was at City College, which is a CUNY up in Harlem, and it had recently launched its environmental engineering program. So I was lucky enough to be around for that, and I was able to switch into that program. And yeah, I stuck around. I completed that, my bachelor's in environmental engineering in 2013. And then in my last year of my undergrad, I had a capstone project. And the professor of that, or the kind of the lead of our capstone project, really opened my eyes to like the specific climate change issues in New York City. And I realized like, oh, I need more schooling. Like I need to dig into this further. I need to learn more, because that kind of made me realize like, oh, not only do I want to be part of like the climate change solution, I really want to be specifically part of the solution for New York City. And that included, learning a lot more about building science, and again, like the specifics in New York. So then I stuck around for my master's, also at City College, my master's in environmental engineering.
How long was that? How long was that master's process for you?
It took me 2 years. I was at City College for about 7.5 years. My undergrad took me 5.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of because, it was difficult. Although I was good at math and science in high school, that did not always translate to these college courses. I struggled. And I also worked at least 2 part-time jobs for the duration of my college, for my undergrad and master's trajectory. So I kind of had to be part-time to be able to afford my rent and living. I had moved up to be closer to Harlem because originally my commute was 2 hours each way. So about 2 years into being at City College, I moved up there, but then that meant I had, living expenses that I needed to ensure that I could cover. So yeah.
Yeah,
So it
no,
took a while, but I don't regret it.
no, not at all. Listen, you needed to do what you needed to do, and there's
Yeah.
no, there's a template that I think is fed to young kids in high school that you have to go to college and it has to be 4 years, and then you have to be a
Mm-hmm.
graduate, and then you have to go to graduate school, and that's 2 or 3 years. Everyone's journey is different, and you have those experiences, those part-time jobs, the fact that you had to, in a sense, grind to finish that all is part of your makeup. So
Yeah.
kudos to you for for sticking through that and seeing it to the end. So the
Thank
the
you.
movie An Inconvenient Truth, where did you see that? Like, who were you with when you were
I
watching?
wish I
Like,
remember. I don't know how I saw it. I must have been around 2008 or 2009.
Mhm.
But I unfortunately can't recall who I was with, even though, it was a pivotal moment in my life. I don't remember where I saw it or who I was with, but yeah, it had a huge impact on me. I mean, I had obviously been aware of like climate change and global war at the time. I think global warming was more of the term that was being used. I was obviously familiar with that, but I don't think I understood what this meant for, I guess I had thought like, oh, it's like a planet's issue, not a people issue. And the movie really connected the dots, which I can't believe I needed those dots connected, but like it put it in your face, like what this is doing to people and to like people's lives and people's homes. And so that is what had like that profound impact and made me want to change degrees. And then a very similar thing happened in that last year of undergrad, where I was working with this capstone professor, and it was the same thing. Like I needed, we had been learning about these, we had taken these engineering courses, but they were all like very theoretical. It wasn't like application of what does this look like for, for people in Queens or, for people's lives here in New York City, until I had that capstone professor really demonstrate like what does this look like in New York City. And then that's when I kind of had this other profound kind of realization, like, oh, this is exactly what I want to do.
No, absolutely. And there's a disconnect. I'm glad you mentioned the fact that your interests are niche, almost niching down on environmental issues as applied to
Mhm.
New York City, because there's a sense of a disconnect between climate change and New York City for lay people, where
Mm-hmm.
they hear of climate change and they hear of sea levels rising and deforestation and floods, and they think, well, New York City, that's really not an us issue.
Right.
And I know there's a lot of work with a lot of nonprofit organizations and educational institutions um, to make and educate really New York City residents, like, no, this climate change thing is coming for you too.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Exactly.
in a very real way. In fact, I just completed um, co-authoring an article on extreme heat issues and
Mm-hmm.
how they disproportionately impact low income and Latino residents, and Black and Hispanic, obviously diverse communities in urban areas disproportionately. And it's, that's just one of the many issues, as you know. So,
Yeah.
you became interested in environment and sustainability, environmental issues, and climate change when you watched a video. You pivoted, and
Mm-hmm.
you declared your degree in, I guess it was environmental engineering, you said,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and then you got a master's following up on that. And then what have you been up to in your career, in your work that involves, sustainability or climate change issues?
Yeah. So, I graduated and naively thought that with a bachelor's and master's in environmental engineering, I would get my dream job. And that was not the case. I really struggled to get my foot in the door, even with those degrees, which I had followed that template you mentioned earlier. Part of that template is also like, if you get a good degree, like, you'll get the job. No one talks about, though, that there are also all these other steps and barriers in between graduation day and landing that job. And I really struggled with that. And I remember, I was applying everywhere. I could not even get like an interview. And I graduated in May, and November, or it was like September or October. And I was like, my grace period for my loans is about to run up. They give you like 6 months after graduation, this like grace period, but then my loans were going to kick in. And, I had, luckily City College is a CUNY, so it's much more affordable. And my loans were probably significantly less than what others have, but they were still massive loans that I had to pay. And so I was starting to get really scared, like, my part-time jobs aren't going to cut it. And because I was working at a doctor's office and at a restaurant, and it just wasn't going to cut the loan. So luckily, and this actually is let me back up a little. While I was an undergrad, and people were starting to do internships, I sought internships. I also had a hard time getting an internship in the sustainability industry. But my dad, who's a waiter at a restaurant on the Upper East Side, he is constantly talking to anyone who will listen about his daughters and what his daughters are doing. So there was a client, and somehow his daughters came up, my sister and I, and he said, oh, well, one of my daughters is studying engineering. And the guy was like, oh, send me her resume. I'll get her an internship. And that's what happened. That's what got me my first internship, which turned into my first, second, third, and fourth internship because they kept calling me back. So what happened is that I graduated with many internships in construction, with a great firm in New York City, Turner Construction. I'm so grateful for them, giving me a chance and calling me back. And so when I couldn't find a job in sustainability after I graduated, eventually I called them. I had left all my internships on great terms, where they said, like, the day you graduate, call us, we'll hire you. And that's exactly what happened. So I worked there for 2 years, actually back on a project in Queens and College Point, the New York City Police Academy, which was an incredible project. But, even while I was there, and I loved the firm, I loved, Turner to me felt pretty diverse. There was actually a lot of like CUNY representation. So it felt almost like another step outside of college. Like there was also like a lot of city college people. Like there was like all this community that I had already kind of been like used to. So it didn't feel like this like brand new thing, but it was missing, you know, that like climate change focus that I was really hoping to be a part of, and that I had dedicated what felt like the last 7.5 years working towards. So eventually I was like, okay, I want to start looking, let me try again in the sustainability industry. And I struggled because now my internships and my you know career, my professional experience was just in construction. So it was like even harder. And I reached out to that same, you know, capstone professor who ended up being my thesis mentor. I reached out to him and kind of explained like, like he knew how much I wanted to be in this space. Like I dedicated my whole master's to focusing on this. And I explained like, I really want to be working in this space. I just can't seem to get in. And he helped me. He was really well connected, and he helped me. He connected me to a few people and basically helped me get some interviews. And the reason that has like stuck with me is because I realize how lucky and like that opportunity just doesn't exist for everyone. It can't, right? Like he's one person. He cannot extend those opportunities to every single person he knows. And actually that I know of, he does a great job of doing that. But even still, like that, having to know someone to get your foot in the door is just not a sustainable solution. It's not an equitable solution. Not everyone knows someone to get them into the door. So although, that was pivotal for me, and I don't know if it would have happened else, without him, I realized that is an issue that we need to like really fix, because not everyone has that connection. And I mean, even my dad connection, like how lucky and at the right time was that opportunity that like a client happened to extend help like that. And so again, like I recognize that I got really lucky, but that luck is not a sustainable, it can't be the solution, can't be what we continue to lean on to ensure that people get opportunities, because it's just not sustainable or fair or equitable. We need to actually address like, why is it so challenging for people to get their foot in the door in this industry that we're passionate about and disciplined and have the degrees to show it. So that connection eventually helped, and I ended up interviewing at a bunch of places, and finally I landed at the New York City Mayor's Office of Sustainability, and that's kind of what started my sustainability or climate change kind of focused career.
So what and by the way, and we've discussed this off the podcast, and other conversations, but your story resonates so much with me because it's in many ways my story, and I won't go into all of that right now, but why in your opinion, why is it so difficult for people to get into this space? They clearly have a demonstrated interest in this. You studied it, you had internships, and not just kind of an interest that you follow Instagram accounts on environment. Like you actually studied this stuff. You still struggled to get in. I was an environmental scientist, and I had my resume was stellar with legal internships, with state, federal, and city government, environmental legal internships. I sent out almost 100 resumes and cover letters, and it wasn't until my wife, who had been laid off, who was working as a sous chef, and her boss had a client who was a partner at an environmental firm. And even with that connection, I still had to hound this guy for about 10 months until he finally offered me a job working in as a law clerk out of law school for $15 an hour. So I mean, talk about barriers to entry. My whole existence has been a barrier to entry.
Yeah.
What's going on? Like, how Why is it like this? I mean, you don't hear this story from a lot of people. You hear it from certain individuals. What's
Yep.
going on?
And we'll get to this at some point, but with Latinx and sustainability, what we found is everyone has this similar story,
Hmm.
runs into all these barriers. So, what I personally, for me, what I think um played into this a lot is one, like I mentioned, just the lack of guidance and resources at home, which is not faulting anyone. My parents gave me all the love and like emotional support that they could, but they just could not provide guidance in terms of job seeking, in terms of telling me to go out there and find mentors, and in this, in terms of context around the sustainability industry, they definitely didn't know. So I think that's a big part of it. The other is that I graduated from a CUNY system and from a CUNY school, and I think oftentimes when there isn't maybe CUNY representation at an organization, they might overlook or pass a CUNY graduate when they're in competition with someone from, let's say, NYU or Columbia.
Hmm.
And I think that fails to look at the whole story. A lot of people are in the CUNY schools for socioeconomic reasons. Like I said, they're affordable. They're like significant. I don't know what NYU or Columbia costs, but I wouldn't doubt if it's like 4 times or maybe even more as much. So it's a lot of people are there or made those decisions to be there for, economic factors, because they could not just afford to be in that type of debt, because they could get, financial aid to cover their entire schooling at CUNY, where that wouldn't have been possible at another place. Um, and that does not, I don't think that story is what comes to mind when hiring decision makers get 2 resumes from 2 similar students, but one has Columbia on it and one has, let's say, City College. And so that's why, I don't fully blame that decision maker for making that decision if they're not thinking about kind of this person more holistically. And they might not be if they haven't had exposure to folks from the CUNY system, or if they haven't heard, people advocate to like kind of understand. Another thing is, internships. There's a lot of internships, especially in the public sector, that for a long time were unpaid.
Hmm.
That will automatically rule out so many students who cannot afford to do free work. I
Yeah.
was one of those students. Like there was no way. And that's a tough decision when you're like 19 or whatever, 20, and you're like, okay, I know that this role would help me in my career, but also like I have bills to pay right now. Like I have other priorities at this present moment that I can't sacrifice for like my long-term goals. And it's unfortunate. But it's just the reality. Like I could have never, and I don't know many people, many of my classmates at City College that could have done free work. Like we
You,
were, yeah,
yeah, and you know what? I mean, you're describing something that I feel like until recently, I was just an unpaid legal intern my whole life.
that's crazy.
But let me tell you, when I was in undergrad, I was offered an internship with the U.S. EPA, and I had already done one summer in Region 10, in Seattle, and I had an opportunity to do an internship in Region 2 in New York, and it was unpaid. And I haven't asked my parents for money since I was 14 years old.
Hmm.
So I've always been working, and I said, well, this is exactly what you said. This is an opportunity that it will help advance my resume and ultimately my career. So I took it. And then what I
Hmm.
did at night, I went and worked as a tele fundraiser for the United Jewish Appeals Federation. and I was,
Wow.
and I was terrible at it. I'm not very good at over the phone, like cold calling sales. You know how they tell you, like, don't take no for an answer? Like,
Yeah.
I like welcome no. I was so tired, Christina. I was working all day, and then at night I had to go and like perk up and be like doing cold call sales. But those are the things that, you know, like the people that you're describing, kind of, those are the sacrifices they need to do, either pass
Mm-hmm.
up on opportunities or find weird second jobs or hustle to pay their rent, which I did. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so given what you know and what you've gone through, what are some actionable things? Put yourself as either the younger version of you, or if you're giving advice to, let's just call it a younger cousin or somebody's younger sister who is a second or third year college student and is into climate change work, sustainability, but has a similar background like us, coming from immigrant parents or
Mm-hmm.
first generation parents who don't have connections, don't have the hookups, but are just passionate and interested. What are some actionable things that you would tell them to do in the next, 2 years before they graduate, and right, and upon graduation, if they don't find that job right away?
Yeah. Well, the first I would say is seek communities, and what I mean is, professional development networking organizations or something, that is ideally, actually find them all. Like there are some out there that are really sustainability focused but really lack diversity, but still you can probably learn from joining some of those, but also find those same type of professional development membership organizations, that are made up of your community, or people that maybe have a better understanding of like your lived experience because they've lived it too, and they can give you firsthand advice of like how they kind of landed, or like what they've learned from being in those spaces. And I guarantee that those people that have had the same challenges that you might be facing, um or maybe haven't faced yet, are the most interested in helping you so that you avoid those challenges, because they went through it, right? And they don't want their you know little cousins or just younger generations to have to suffer, and deal with like all these barriers to entry like they did. So, and there's a lot of groups out there now, which is great, and I'm sure there will continue to be more. So seek them, lean on them, get connected through them, learn through them, learn through their experience. The other thing I would say is take advantage while you're in school of all the free resources that are out there. Again, I know that this is specifically hard for students that are going to school and working part-time and commuting. Like they just literally have less hours in the day. So I know it's hard to ask, like, let me put something else on your plate. But if you can, seek out certifications that are either no cost or like significantly reduced cost because you're a student. All those things can help kind of, help you get your foot in the door, or make your kind of resume more competitive.
When you say certifications, can you just give like one example of what certification you might be referring to?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many out there, and I think it depends what aspect of sustainability you're looking into. But some that I can think of, just because I've gotten them over the last like 10 years or so, but like the lead GA test, I think it's a reduced cost for students. There's like
Hmm.
an eco district certification that I also believe is reduced cost for students. There's like a BPI healthy homes. And sometimes it's not that these specific certifications are like what, sometimes some people might be looking for these specific certifications, but in other times I think it just also demonstrates, like, again, like I am passionate, I am seeking opportunities to like enhance my learning in these spaces. So if they're little to no cost, like, try to get them. They can't hurt.
That's a great. I mean, anything that you can do, and I'm speaking to you, the metaphorical young person that we're, the hypothetical young person that we're referring to, that you can do to, make your resume pop a little bit, and those certifications absolutely do help. Something, Christina, I've interviewed a number of people in my career. I've been on either interview panels, or I've interviewed people directly to hire, either as interns or younger associates. whenever I see someone that has authored anything
Mm.
in almost any publication, that person immediately stands out
Mhm.
even more so than what college they went to, even more so than their their internship experiences. Like, this person had an idea for an article that is dealing with whatever sustainability, environmental, equity, something that's topical to the job that they're applying to, and they went and found a publication or a website like medium.com, or somebody that I came across recently on LinkedIn. They have a publication called The Green Zine, where they invite young people to, write content,
Mhm.
almost people with no experience. So that's just something else that people can do to really make their resume stand out. So to your point, find a community of people that you know that you can kind of then tap into for their resources. So in essence, find some mentors, look for those communities. And then you had mentioned get some certifications. I brought up, um, trying to find some authorship experiences. What about for somebody who's an experienced professional, Christina, who you did 2 years in construction, and then we're very, very intentional in pivoting back
Mhm.
to sustainability in the environmental kind of space. What about somebody that's been working for 10 or 15 years? What are your thoughts on somebody who's, maybe just last year they watched An Inconvenient Truth, and they're saying, I need to pivot into this space. Is it
Yeah.
similar advice for them or something different? What would you say?
I would actually say similar. And I've met a lot of these people through Latinxs and sustainability, and they have it made harder, if not just as hard, because again, now their career or their experience all reflects something else.
Hmm.
But what I would say, and this is also applicable to someone that just graduated, that maybe has, you know, part-time jobs that have nothing to do with sustainability, which, like I mentioned, I worked at a doctor's office and a restaurant. So when I started applying, I didn't advocate for like any of the learnings or the skills that I was bringing to the table because of those jobs, because I wasn't told that could be done. Like, kind of like the limited advice I had gotten was like, okay, but that's not sustainability. Like, don't even include that. But now I think, now that people are being more intentional about diversity, equity, inclusion, and workforce development, I think there's a lot of value in sharing skills and what you bring to the table from all these different places, these diverse experiences that you have, whether, and that's like lived experiences, but also, different professional experiences. Bring that to the table and like learn how to advocate for yourself, um, by sharing like what you've done. So again, that could be like students that have worked part-time jobs, or that could be a seasoned professional that has worked in some other career that's looking to break in. Like, there's a lot of skills that are transferable. Like customer service, like working in a restaurant, that's customer service. If I'm sure you can pull out project management from a lot of different roles outside of sustainability that would be transferable. So figuring out how to kind of spin that and advocate for yourself. And if you can, like, share that whole story so that people can start to see you as like the human being that you are, rather than this like sheet of paper.
Hmm.
Um, and if you do land yourself in a good interview with a place that really is not only, lip servicing diversity, equity, inclusion, but really believes in it, then hopefully they'll give you a chance. And if they're not, then maybe you just learn like this place is just doing lip service. This place actually doesn't care about diversity, equity, inclusion. This place actually doesn't care about being intentional about workforce development and diversifying their workforce, because they don't care about these like unique, different, diverse experiences. So yeah, and I didn't know that as a younger person. Like I said, I never brought up all these things that now I feel like taught me so much. I mean, anyone that works in a restaurant in New York City, that is crazy customer service experience. That is definitely applicable to all jobs and relationship building and just dealing with people. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're that.
Anyone that's worked retail and restaurant industry
Oh my goodness.
is almost qualified
Absolutely.
to work almost anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
What something else that I just want to let people in that situation know is that they have a chance. Usually, most jobs require a cover letter, but if jobs don't require a cover letter and only ask for a resume but give you the option to submit more, take that invitation,
Mm-hmm.
use the cover letter to tell your story. This is
Yeah.
where Christina mentioned, there's a story to you, and maybe for 10 years you worked as a bookkeeper,
Mm-hmm.
working for whatever, a textile, importer, and that was your job. But then you watched a documentary or you read a book that sparked an interest in you doing something better for the environment and wanting a purpose in your life. That's where that doesn't come out in the resume. That comes out in the cover letter. That comes out and then even more so in the interview. So I would encourage, seasoned professionals who want to pivot to really work on storytelling with those cover letters. And then it has to be you have to do it in one page. I don't think people want to see 2-page cover letters anymore. I mean, maybe you can get
Right.
away with it. Christina, are there any resources very quickly that you might recommend for any job seekers trying to enter the sustainability space? Any books or podcasts or movies that you might just recommend for people that are trying to beef themselves up a little more?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I don't have much. Probably because we are so in the weeds of like our own development of website and resources. So, you definitely use Latinxs in sustainability as a resource. You don't have to be Latinx to follow. We post a lot of fellowship, internship, job opportunities on our LinkedIn page. That's probably where we're most active, is on LinkedIn. So follow us on LinkedIn. We also have an Instagram. There are also other organizations that similarly have kind of a focus on bringing this information directly to followers. So like Brown Girl Green Jobs Board post a lot of jobs constantly. So that's a great resource. There is another group that is also, I think, primarily focused out of New York City, but maybe they have a national reach as well. But they're Women of Color Collective in Sustainability. So WOCSS. No, WOCCS. Sorry about yeah, they also share resources. So there's and that's just there's also young professionals in energy who have chapters all over the country. They have a huge New York City chapter. So there's a lot of groups. And that's probably just scratching the surface. There are a lot of groups out there that are really helping kind of curate all the information that's out there and really bring it together in more, I think, digestible and accessible ways to their membership following. And that I know of, most of these are free. So there's no harm in joining all of them and getting all the information from them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll make sure to add those resources and any others in the show notes for those who want some links. Christina, final word. Anything for those who want to enter or pivot into the career of doing what we do, trying to help heal the planet and help move humanity forward. Any words of advice or final words for them?
And so I forgot there's another Clean Energy Leadership Institute. That's another one.
Oh, okay,
But
great.
yeah, in terms of I think that the tides are changing. I like, with the murder of George Floyd and COVID and everything that's occurred in the last 3 years now. I do really think there's like a social awakening occurring, and it feels palpable in the sustainability industry, where I think people are already like mission driven. Lean into that. Like, as Jose mentioned, like use these invitations to share your story, like really do that. Let people in so that they can like evaluate you as a person. And I think that will go a long way. I think that'll also help you determine kind of what type of place you want to be into, like especially for folks from diverse backgrounds. Like we want to be in inclusive spaces. And a lot of that, real commitment to inclusion and equity can be seen in the hiring process. So, take it as a learning opportunity. Obviously I know that's easier said than done. Like when you're really looking to break into the space, you're kind of like, I might take what I can get. But I think there's a lot that can be learned in that process about an organization, and we should be evaluating them the way that we've all been harshly evaluated for so long. But yeah, I would say first and foremost, find community. We have been, I think a lot of people from diverse communities or marginalized communities have been historically excluded from this industry. It's been a historically privileged and white one. But we are starting to form our own table. So like find your seat at your table, and work with others that again, maybe have gone through this before you can share their experiences and who want to help. Like I said, everyone that I've met through Latinx and sustainability who's had challenges getting into this space is so passionate about giving back because they want to ensure that they can help others avoid what they went through. So find those people.
Cristina, you've said it all. Thank you. Listen, you are 100% correct. People need to find not just a seat at a table, but find your seat at your table. And I promise your table is out there. You may just need to look for it a little bit. Stay resilient, stay positive, and trust. The advice that I give to young people and people that want to pivot into the space is something came up within you that drew your interest into this space and drew your interest to do this work. And not to get too metaphysical, but the universe, God, whatever kind of spiritual space that you maybe are in tune with, or if you're not, spiritual, if you're atheist, there's something in you, your instinct, your intuition, something is driving you into this space. Trust that instinct, and don't let a bunch of no's deter you. All it takes is one yes. So Cristina, your advice to seek a community of like-minded people and then lean into them is something that I'm hearing from a lot of different individuals. Thank you so much, Cristina. Everyone, go check out Cristina, Latinx and Sustainability. You can find them on LinkedIn. They have an awesome newsletter. Their website just got revamped, right, Cristina? A few weeks ago?
Yep. And the website is actually Latinx and then S, like plural, Latinx's in sustainability.org.
Everyone, go check it out. You don't have to be Latino or Latinx to join and to be a part of it. Keep a lookout for Cristina. She's doing big things out there. Cristina, I really appreciate you joining me today, and I'm really excited for what's to come for you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me in that episode. I really enjoyed speaking with Cristina, and I hope you enjoyed listening to us. Next episode, I'll have Mark Johnson, environmental engineer at Geosyntech. If you're enjoying this podcast, make sure to subscribe using my YouTube channel, drop a like or comment, or subscribe using whatever podcast downloading platform you prefer. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful, blessed day.